Tuesday. We can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone last class for confirming research projects, dates. We have all those set. We do have 2 students that have not completed, so I will ping you during break and we'll make sure to get those couple projects set. Before we go ahead and get started, does anyone have any announcements with student groups that they want to share out?
Yeah, so I'm involved with Net Impact, and we have our kickoff meeting tomorrow night at 7. All the Zoom details and that side of that type of stuff can be found on our Instagram at ImpactUMN, Net Impact UMN. But we're just going to be covering all the opportunities, the ways to get involved, whether that's consulting, working with nonprofits, or just generally getting involved with the club. And then we'll be talking about how to live sustainably within your college lifestyle. So yeah, check it out if you want to.
I love it. Thank you so much, Spencer. Anyone else?
Yeah, I do have an update quick for SHRM as well, the HR club on campus. As I mentioned, this week, Thursday, will be our intro meeting for spring semester. If you're interested in HR at all, please come and check us out. We'll be talking about board openings for next year. So if you're interested in getting into leadership positions at all, we do have 4 openings on our board, which would be great opportunities for leadership. In addition to that, we'll also have someone from the Masters of HR program from Carlson coming to speak about engagement opportunities with that and how to learn more about info sessions, things of that sort. So if you're interested in HR after undergrad at all, come check that out as well. And I can send the Zoom link in the chat as well.
I was going to say, yeah, please feel free, both of you, to share links in chat bar. Anything else? All right. Well, we had a video HBR on reimagining capitalism. We'll debrief, talk a little bit about what the role of business looks like today and into the future. And then we're going to spend the majority of class time today focusing on our service learning project. So talking about what are best practices in being that consultant, in leveraging experience you've had with prior classes, potentially prior work that you've done outside of school. And we're going to talk about kind of some key strategies as we go into the semester. And then we'll talk a little bit in terms of just preparing for those presentations. That's going to take the entire duration of the class on Thursday. So we have 7 organizations that are going to be presenting. And then after class on Thursday, you'll be submitting your priorities on which your preference you want to work with those organizations. I'll talk more about it then. But if you have any questions in the meantime, definitely let me know. So I would love to hear from you now. We watched the Reimagining Capitalism video. They talked about a lot of different information. Would first like to start, why capitalism? Why is it a benefit? And then from there, I want to talk about, what can we do to create a system, that works for all of us. I'm going to pause sharing my screen and would just love to hear from you, what were kind of takeaways from that video?
Well, I can start. I suppose a good thing about capitalism is that it allows for like a lot of innovation, and I guess it's sort of like a freedom thing for a lot of private innovators. I myself am not a huge fan of capitalism, honestly, but it does have its upsides.
I was going to say, Ian, of all folks, our nonprofit major, I just find the irony in leading, but I agree. The driver of innovation and change, I think, is something that can be stressed and proven throughout history. So the question is, at what cost, does that come? And so I believe they talked about 3 different things. One of my favorite quotes is that capitalism is a great tool, but is a poor master. And too often we look at capitalism as the solution in and of itself. So does anyone recall kind of the three elements? And I'm reading Leah, definitely highly skeptical of capitalism. They talked about three things, which is why we need to recreate capitalism.
Was it correct me if I'm talking about the wrong part, but was it the inequity, the whole why stop if nobody else is gonna cause us to stop, and how it writes the rules to kind of reinforce itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the second one I believe they mentioned. The first one is we live in a world right now where we're talking about sustainability, environmental issues, whether it's ocean pollution, topsoil degradation, but essentially our natural resources are not costs into the cost of business. This idea of not accounting for it is called externalities. So it's a cost that business doesn't have to incorporate. Have any of you heard of that term before? Externalities? And so we'll talk more about it during the semester, but a lot of social enterprises that we're going to hear from are very intentional about incorporating this cost of doing business. You know, sometimes it's as simple as trying to replant trees for trees they're cutting down, but essentially there's a whole slew of different costs that typically are not incorporated into business. And so this idea that capitalism isn't accounting for that and no one's holding businesses individually accountable for what they're doing is a major issue. Spencer talked about the second one, which is rising inequality. And when you have rising inequality, it leads to long-term inequities. We see that right now in Minnesota in terms of opportunity gaps in education, and that leads to lifelong income opportunities and a whole range of other costs that come with that. There was a third they talked about as well. So the third one they talked about, which then really goes into the solutions, is how do we create, you know, a more proper structure, is around working with government. You know, whether it's, we'll talk about lobbyists, but essentially making sure that organizations are not able to game the system in terms of creating regulations that then self-incentivize their own operations that were essentially perpetuating our issues. But the meat of the conversation then was, how do we create a solution for the future of capitalism? Would love to have a little bit of dialogue on what you heard there for solutions, and then also your own feedback or skepticism on, you know, how this could work.
I personally think that one of the biggest things that could be changed in order to at least sort of, in a way, make our current system better would be to reverse the Citizens United ruling that basically said that corporations are people and money is speech. That is one of the biggest things that is sort of leading to all of the problems that we have now, is just the amount of money that companies are able to pump into politics and exactly game the system. And that, especially lately, we're starting to see a lot of issues with that, where it's becoming more of a pay-to-play type of system in our current political landscape, rather than whoever has rather than the best ideas rising to the top. It's whoever can raise the most money from the corporations, and then the corporations sort of own that candidate to a certain extent, and then the candidate, after they get out of politics, just goes and works for that company and makes an insane consulting fee.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Matthew, I think you've done a lot of your homework outside of that video, but one of the points related to that they talked about, if you just look back 40 years, only 10% of corporate profits came from financial instruments. Fast forward to now, 30% of corporate profits are coming from financial instruments. And so what that is really creating is changing an economy that's focused on creation. You know, whether it's building homes, building your iPhones, you know, creating books for you to read. We're now in the business of essentially speculating on our own assets. And so that lack of creation, and then as Matt talked about, once you bring individuals into this that essentially have power over policy, it can create some real issues. Any other takeaways? All right, well, that's something I think we will all continue to talk about. You know, the positives of business, because there is a lot of positive, but we really, I think, need to make sure in terms of creating an economy and a solution that works for everyone. And I know they talked about the idea of creating shared value, of making sure that there are industry, you know, collaboratives and consortiums in terms of rule setting and standardization. So one of the examples I believe they prefaced was Nike, but raising its hand and saying, you know, we don't want to participate in child labor. But how do we do that without making sure everyone else up the supply chain is not participating in that type of practice as well? And then from a pricing standpoint, to make sure our prices are competitive, we need to make sure competitors are also not participating in these things. And lastly then was the regulation piece. It's great to come together and say, you know, we're going to set these goals, but if then everyone leaves that meeting and no one's held accountable for their actions, how are we actually going to create change? And so you need, you know, sound government with audit and regulation and measurement. I get long-winded talking about that, but I think it's important. So with this, I want to make sure we're moving into talking about our service learning projects, and I will pass to Leah to share some advice with that regard.
Cool. So Matt and I talked a little bit about this because I've had good experience going through the Carlson Ventures Enterprise, and Morgan, who's in this class, has also gone through Ventures and may have some things to offer. But I just wanted to hit on some things we really call out in Ventures, which for you personally and as a team, this is a really great professional development opportunity. I know, if I recall correctly, Toby talked about 4 different areas of management skills to grow, and it's, you know, self-management, team management, project management, and client management. And each of those call on different skills of really being aware, you know, the self-management piece. How am I using my time and my energy? How am I taking care of myself? How am I setting boundaries? Because you need to do all those things or you're going to lose your mind, and no one wants you to lose your mind. You know, with team management, how are we communicating expectations? How are we sharing progress and providing feedback? And then with project management, you know, again, how are we setting up a workflow or backward planning to make sure that we hit, you know, we meet the objectives, we have the deliverables in place, and that we have a work plan that's going to support that with a sharing of the load. And then the client management piece is really managing expectations, facilitating communication, providing progress updates, and understanding that when you make recommendations, they may or may not be taken. So how you kind of work through that and help prioritize that, and push when you need to push and listen when you need to listen. And so the other piece, I think, here with the professional development aspect is really self-discovery and feedback mechanisms. And something that I'm really wanting to work on this semester is practicing, you know, developing habits of feedback. So this is an offer to all of you. If there's a skill or a mindset or something that you want to work on I would love to figure out, sort of a self-management professional development plan so I can check in and hold you accountable. Or I can, if you're wanting to practice your executive presence and your presentation skills, I have a lot of public speaking and oratory experience. I can help provide tips that way. Just there are a lot of things that we can call on. So that's something I offer up, because you don't want to leave that on the table in an experience like this. This is a really prime, soft place to land for feedback. The other piece to you with career, getting to work with these clients, this is a great career discovery, career discernment process, because equally important to figuring out what you like to do and how you like to work with folks is learning what you don't like to do and how you don't like to work with folks, which is the more painful learning, but is still really valuable. And then, this is a really incredible way through interviews and through working with your client to build your network. So really you get to maximize those times. And then the way to co-create value here with your client is that they're coming to you because they need and want fresh perspectives and ideas. Keep in mind, they're not looking, it's very easy to be cynical and like, oh, they just want us to tell them what they want to hear. I think this is a case where that's not true. They're really looking for new ideas and opportunities that they might be missing. So they're not looking for you to be impartial. Your job as a consultant is to form an opinion based on experience, based on information that you're gathering, and to come to the table confidently, if not as an expert, as a knowledgeable third party. So they want you to have some skin in the game. The other piece here, I was talking to some folks at a marketing agency last week, and they were saying, oh, while you're at the U, you have the best research resources you're probably ever going to have. And so I would say really maximize what's available to you here. You have subject matter experts, you have researchers, you have the Office of Tech Commercialization, you have the extension arms of the university and folks who are, and like the Office of Public Engagement, you have the business libraries. Like there's so much that it can be overwhelming, but anytime you need to process through that or see if there's a resource that's available to you here, use it because you won't get that opportunity again. And then, the value to your client of exposure. You're getting to learn about a project or a product that they might not know about, that others might not know about. And so you have the chance to serve as an ambassador and an advocate on behalf of your client to your peers, to your network, to your professors, to kind of help grow their scope and circle of influence. So it really is an opportunity for value on both sides. So treat it as such and bring that confidence to it. Know that they're not just doing you a favor. They really are reliant on you as a student to help them move forward. That's all I have.
Thank you, Leah. And so I want to see a quick either raise of hand or digital raise of hand. How many of you have worked on projects where you're working as a client with an organization, whether through school, work, volunteerism, etc.? So it looks like about roughly half of you. So want to spend, we're seeing, participant hand raised, perfect. So seeing roughly half of you have done that. So we'll spend now a few minutes talking about those of you that have had these experiences. Share back with your group what went well, what didn't, what was the experience. And then I want to spend some time specifically documenting how could you make that experience better? What specifically could you do to create an environment where you're working with your team, as Leah talked about, thinking specifically of those 4 different management types: management of self, management of your team, management of the project or the task at hand, and then management of that client relationship as well. Thinking about each of those areas, I want to come back as a group, we'll debrief. And if you have any questions, as usual, please stay back and and resume the recording. So would love to, if we could just debrief. First of all, those of you that have had experiences, if we could hear where those were, what were the types of projects you were working on? Was it a school project? Was it an internship, or what was that experience itself? And then also talk about what were your learnings or insights of how can you set yourself up for the success this semester. If we could hear first from group one.
Yeah, so some past successful projects from our team kind of were in a few different categories. Some people's were through internships, others were through class projects. So one in specifically was the Management 4008 class, I believe. And then others were through the enterprise programs at Carlson, the experiential based ones. And some things that we thought would set yourselves up for success specifically was, especially right at the beginning, defining expectations and scope of a project with the client, just to really understand, what problem they think they need help with and how we can offer the most support and what's actually realistically able to be accomplished in our timeline. So for this class specifically, by the time May rolls around. And then some other things were just going in with an open mind and recognizing that these companies, like, they know we're students, but they're also bringing us in for our expertise, and we do have things to offer based on our education and our past experiences. So going in really with the idea that we can help, and it's not something that is like over our heads in any way or shape. Being able to dedicate specific time. So one thing that was brought up in our group was that when it's been with a class project, when you have a client component to it, it was hard to balance, the class deliverables with making sure that you were also meeting all of the client's needs. And so just making sure we're very cognizant and aware of that going into the project. And then just on a team standpoint, communicating with each other and making sure everyone's up to date on what each person's been working on in the past week, what needs to be done to continue the project forward, and then making sure the client's aware of that as well.
Thank you. I I think that's the worst feeling, is projects that I've done in the past where you are working with management or a team and you're instructed a certain thing, and whether you heard it a particular way or they didn't communicate and expected something different, but you leave and you do all this work and research and you come prepared and it misses the mark. And it's not because you didn't deliver, but it's because there was that lack of communication and expectation setting on the front end, that you end up with something that's just misaligned. That's something we want to make sure, and we'll emphasize it both in our presentations on Thursday, but also more importantly is that first client meeting you'll have next Thursday on the 4th. So how about group two?
We also talked about class projects, especially like through the leadership minor. And then someone had actually like started their own business company venture type situation, which was really interesting to hear about, and some internships too. But one of like the most common threads we had going through all of those for like setting yourself up for success was like talking about communication and how like bad communication can lead to like a breakdown in expectations, and it can literally like go through like every other aspect of the 4, because if you're not communicating, like you don't know what they want, you don't know like what you need to give and all those things. So kind of general, but I feel like it was all encompassing.
Absolutely. And so I think when we talk about communication, and we'll talk about this more in the next slide as well, but it's important, how are we dialoguing? Like to, make sure we're reiterating that we're saying the same thing, hearing the same thing, but then also how are we recording that? because like we talked about, we're going to get to May then. And, based on our ability to record that, did we take notes in the moment? Right now, these lectures are recorded. That's a huge asset that if we have a question, we can go back and check that. Let's, make sure we're setting ourselves up for success and in documenting that communication. Anything else? Also would love the fact that someone started their own personal business venture. If they want to share any experiences or personal stories, I think that is always an immensely valuable experience.
So I was the one who started my own business, and we were talking about how important communication is in any of the things you do. So to me, because we were talking about how marketing is important to any type of organization, and most people in nonprofits, they don't really understand about marketing, and a lot of times they think marketing is just like a waste of money. But to me, marketing is really for anybody to have the ear to listen to the people you're serving, and also building that bridge to deliver whatever you want to deliver. So to me, marketing is really one of the most important components once you have your content, right? Once you have your product, and then the marketing is really one of the most important components.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting your story out there. It's just like we talked about, that communication piece. Thank you, Yushi. All right, how about group 3?
I can go over us, sorry. Most of our past successful projects had to do with net impact and the consulting opportunities that they had. We kind of had a variety of experiences there, and we'd really echo everything everyone else has said for success. We kind of talked about the importance of communication to rule out ambiguity and to try to have clear expectations between what the client needs and what you're able to deliver.
Ruling out ambiguity. I like it. All right, group 4.
I think that was my group. We talked about, we had already talked about the Management 4008 project, at least in my experience. And the tricky part about that is in working in such a small time frame, like one semester, it's tough to see any tangible results in sales or website traffic. And another hard thing is so the company that I worked with was ran by a student. So for every we were honestly putting in more effort into the company than he did during the semester, which was weird because it wasn't as much of a priority for him as it was for us because it's a side project for that guy. So I guess setting ourselves up for success.
It almost sounds like what you're saying is level setting personal expectations.
Yeah. Personal expectations are huge, especially it's just a small company, something that there's a lot of room for improvement in the company, but we didn't find that improvement because it was hard working with the founder of the company, I guess. So I don't know.
No, that's great. And I think that plays into what we're going to talk about next. Greg and Leah, please feel free to speak up and add other things you want to talk about. But a couple themes that, what I'm hearing, first of all, I want to emphasize you shared past experiences that you've had, whether it's for student clubs, work experiences with internships, starting your own ventures, the multitude of classes you've taken. You should have confidence of knowing you're coming in going to add value. That, I want to make sure we're dispelling that right away, that these are organizations that are very busy, that are completing the day-to-day and have raised their hand saying, you will be able to help them with the research that you're going to do, the thoughtful questions you're going to be asking, and the insight that you're going to be providing. I really want you to have, that coming in. And as part of that, I always think about it as that balance between, the humble brag of, your stuff, but you also want to make sure that you're sitting there quietly and taking in the information. Don't come saying you already know the solution. You got to hear the question and the challenges first. So as we talk about, our service learning project, I would say that the 5 types of guidance that I would give, and I can put this back into, is everyone seeing this now as a presentation mode? First of all, do what you say you're going to do. So if you're in a meeting where you say, I'm going to talk to these 3 clients, I'll follow up after this meeting with notes that I took today with an email, or I'll make sure to schedule our next meeting 2 weeks out. Your ability to follow through on the things that you say you're going to do are how you're going to be able to build trust and credibility with that organization. As you build trust and credibility, they're going to start to tell you more of their issues and really allow you to add more value. I always think about the quote that, trust is given in spoonfuls, but it's taken away in handfuls. And so it's so important to make sure that, whatever you're doing, follow through on those things. And then attention to detail. We talked a lot about communication, and communication in all forms. So whether it's written, verbal, we're having a conversation, take advantage of that opportunity while you're talking to your key contacts. So I encourage take notes. As I talked about the fact, this is a huge asset that we're doing this over video. You can be recording this conversation. So, even if I'm not taking notes, if I have the ability to have this recorded and look back upon the information they said, that'll give me a lot more context as I'm completing research. A part of being a good consultant is being able to understand really what the root cause of an issue is. So as an organization is telling you different things, maybe they might be saying that, they really need to grow this earned revenue stream. And it's important to be listening and hearing that, but then think and ask yourself, why is it important to have an earned revenue stream? Is it because their current revenue streams are declining? Is there, a lack of stability there? Or is it because they're a growing organization and they see this new revenue stream will allow them new opportunities? But try to figure out what is the root cause of, why a particular challenge is such an issue for them. A thing I want to really make sure we're talking about is efficiency of staff time. I always encourage the fact that you're a team of 3 or 4 students working with this organization is practice resourcefulness. And what I mean by that is if you have your meeting with them on February 4th, and you're going to have questions for them after that meeting, likely, make sure you meet as a team and pull all those questions together. And then you're sending them one complete list of questions rather than each of you individually pinging them, time after time with questions. Your ability to be efficient with their time will absolutely be seen, and it'll make them want to come back because they're being efficient, and it's a bigger value add for their organization as well as yours. The last thing is, I really want to emphasize this, is don't be afraid to ask good questions. If so often, I think this goes back to the confidence thing as well, and knowing that your experiences you've had at Carlson and in life, you're going to be able to add value. And so if you see something, whether it's why have they not thought about this market segment, or you see a potential way to tell their story, have they thought about this? Make sure you ask it, because in all likelihood they might have thought about it, but they haven't played that scenario out. And so your ability to ask good questions, provide thoughtful advice, will absolutely be beneficial to these organizations. Greg and Leah, anything else that you want to emphasize as well in regard to these service learning projects?
I would add, your questions and your recommendations. Really good to know the organization using the resources available to you. So get a clear sense of their mission, vision, and values. And that will provide you sort of the lens and guardrails for how you're framing things. Like if you pitch something that's way out here and you can ground it in their values, you're going to have a better chance than it just being way out here in isolation. And that may help you think more creatively too about what are different manifestations of these values and what are different routes to reach the vision that they've outlined. So just be really cognizant and reflective with that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I agree with that. And I would also just say that, you got to remember to kind of put yourself in their shoes and in their, what are they coming to you for? And, they're coming to you for insights and solutions, to something that they find is ambiguous, or they're not quite sure what to do. And so I think it's really important to think about that. And they, what did Leah, you said, not impartiality in a previous slide. And, they want your brain power and thought to help them resolve a problem. And they're willing to put their time and energy into working with you to do that. So I just want to really emphasize that they want your help to get to solutions.
Thank you, Greg. I think it's so important. Greg, I know we've had previous conversation of really when, there's a challenge and ambiguity, that's where entrepreneurs thrive, is, in terms of creating solutions and iterating. And so I do want to share, I put the article below, but from previous service learning projects, I would really distill it down into, these were the 4 takeaways that we had that students really talked about throughout the semester. Is organizations are balancing essentially their financial stability, their ability to take in funds, whether it's through fundraising, requesting donations, creating earned revenue programs, and then making sure they're focusing on their mission and they're measuring their impact. That's going to be an ongoing challenge that you're going to have that dialogue, is how is this organization sustainable and what impact are they creating? Another thing that we will talk a lot about this semester is the fact that project scope changes. And that's for a multitude of reasons. Some of that is because you're going to uncover things, you're going to have insights. And so as you have insights, you're going to progress, where this project can go. And that's where the communication, the expectation setting up front is so important in terms of setting up what are those milestones and deliverables that you need. And so as we have written here, I encourage, it's important, you want to stay firm on your goal, but you want to adapt how you're going to get there. And luckily we've, set expectations on the back end with each of these organizations. So they're excited to be working with you. And part of, your assignments in this course are to be creating that roadmap or creating those deliverables, and then actually creating a bit of a contract. So you're on the same page and there's that communication and feedback loop with your organizations. As Leah, Greg, and several of you talked about, is dealing with ambiguity. It's going to be a major part of this class. And I think the more you're able to deal with ambiguity will help you thrive in life, whether professionally or personally. And as we talk about entrepreneurship, I always encourage the ready, fire, aim mentality. At times it can feel there's a little bit of paralysis of making a decision or moving forward because we don't have that perfect or that optimal solution. Part of entrepreneurship is trying something and getting feedback and then improving it and moving forward. And so we'll talk about that throughout this semester. And the last thing is we really try to do with all of our breakout rooms with this entire semester is debriefing. You are going to be working, throughout your life, or I'm sure with classes as well, where you complete a paper and you move on. You're busy. You have a lot going on. And so you don't have the opportunity to reflect and really think about, how could I have improved that experience? Maybe if I didn't procrastinate and wait till the 11th hour, I could have set myself up for more success. It's the same way with project management. And so we'll be doing that iteratively throughout the process. But the more you have the ability to just pause and reflect, I think you can really become more intentional about your actions and how you're spending your time and energy, and make sure in the future you're continuing to improve your output. So I want to take a quick couple-minute break if everyone wants to stretch, and we're going to come back and talk about meeting our clients, and then we will finish up for the day. We will plan to come back at 10:52. Thank you. Make sure we are recording. And group one, if you would be willing to kick it off.
For sure. So I'll kick it off for my group, kind of give a synopsis of what we found and talked about, but I want to encourage my group members to jump in where they feel like I've missed stuff too. But anyways, we have the Friends of Gong Road, and the first thing, we hop to their About page, which is pretty fleshed out and all. And so from what we read, they're Minnesota-based 501c3, but they work with kind of in a partnership organization with Gong Road Children's Foundation, which is a Kenyan NGO. And so they operate with a shared mission of providing education and support to children whose families have been affected by the HIV and AIDS pandemic. So they have kind of an innovative approach to organization and service delivery and recruiting those children who are affected into education programs and such. So that's kind of the synopsis of the organization. They have several programs delving into like education and development, safety, well-being, and community support. So we spent in our group a lot of time, just to be blatantly honest, being really critical of this organization up front. We wanted to be super mindful of kind of the white saviorism that goes into organizations that are based or working with African countries and their issues. So we spent some time on the admissions criteria page and just looking at what qualifies a child to be receptive of their support. And there's some things that kind of raise a couple eyebrows. So if anyone wants to jump in quick and just give a little synopsis from my team of what else we talked about, Matt, feel free to tell us if we're talking too much too. I don't know how much you want to know.
Yeah,
but.
no, this is great. I would really emphasize the fact how unique this organization will be in terms of that dynamic of a partnership where the service provider is really executing the program management.
Right.
And then, they're working in close partnership here in terms of providing that leadership, that guidance. And yeah, I would love to know the additional thoughts as well in terms what participatory feedback looks like. It'll be unique because they will actually have some of their local leadership joining us. So I think it's like 3 or 4 a.m. that they're going to be calling in for those that select the organization the following Thursday on the 4th.
Sure. Yeah, one thing we were interested in learning more about is kind of that dynamic between the Minnesota-based organization and what they're doing in Kenya, in Nairobi specifically. Yeah, I wanted to learn more about that dynamic.
I think you are going to bring up some great questions that the organization is likely dealing with, right now in this moment, and figuring out how do they be a value add while making sure, voice of the customer, voice of their own leadership, their staff is heard.
If I could hop in really quick, I think one thing we talked about in our group that was a bit like something we wanted to be aware of that kind of like raised some red flags was that with their admission criteria, the child's like parents or guardians have to have HIV, or HIV/AIDS, which Sage brought up a good point. That's kind of like pretty personal information to reveal. So curious how that process works. And the children have to reach a certain like academic qualification in order to receive this aid. So children who are in like an especially challenging situation, like if there's drug abuse or if they aren't like academically capable, like deemed by this organization, they cannot be part of the program, which we were a bit skeptical of because it made it appear as though this would be helping the organization with their stats and whatnot, and maybe not helping, like limiting the people that they would help. Not to be too like blunt and rude about it, but that was something that we were a bit nervous and cautious about.
Some of the early observations you have can be some of the most insightful. And so what I encourage is when you're having this critical feedback dialogue with your group is make sure you're documenting it. But when you have the meeting, that first conversation is listen first. They've been in this business of working and leading and dealing with the challenges. So there's likely more nuance than we see. And so it's important that we collect our thoughts, and we keep those thoughts. And once we've heard and learned more, that we're making sure to surface that. And so I want to, caution, don't lead with poking holes, but also don't lose that questioning attitude that you have. I want to make sure we have enough time, so if we can move on to wilderness inquiry.
I can talk for our group. So Wilderness Inquiry, like in short, is an organization that provides outdoor experiences specifically for like groups that might not get them otherwise. So like people with disabilities or urban youth. And so upon like looking at their website, it's like very well executed and like they've clearly established themselves. And so we honestly at first were kind of like, we don't know what information's missing because there's so much of it. But I think a few questions that came up for us is better understanding like how they select which like youth or how they like market themselves to people to like provide these opportunities. And then also looking more into like how their other, like how they train their staff, how they like acquire their staff, and just like various questions like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something to emphasize as well. And feel free to give that type of feedback that you talked about. Thank you, Abby, for sharing, is the website piece. We have 6 organizations that have pretty strong websites. If you compare that to the norm for a lot of smaller growing nonprofits, is how are they telling their story? And so, especially as you're going to have, likely critical feedback later on in the semester, be giving the feedback of what you're observing that they're doing well, as well. And so I think the website piece and telling your story is definitely a part of that. Thank you. And so group 3, Paris Housing.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about it. Paris Housing is an apartment building, basically, that has 15 spots for people aging out of foster care, and then 30 spots, I think, for like affordable housing. And I don't actually have the website up anymore. I don't know what happened to it. But it's on Hennepin Avenue South. And so it's a project that's kind of moving forward through multiple organizations. So like the Graves Foundation, and then it's supported by Connections to Independence. And then I think the developers too, I'm not sure. And some of the questions we had initially, especially after we looked at the project like scope in the syllabus, which is creating a marketing plan to attract an ideal client and market to housing applicants. We really want to know what that means. especially because it sounds like those are for the 30 spots of affordable housing and not necessarily for the folks who are aging out of foster care. So that was one of the things we wanted to learn more about. And then we also wanted to learn more about who does what in the project, because it's such like an amalgamation of organizations that are moving the project forward. And if anyone else wants to add, that'd be great. Otherwise, if you think I covered it all, that's fine too.
It is another unique dynamic in affordable housing to essentially have their impact focused on creating a culture and a community. And so they're bringing together multiple stakeholders. And I think there's a lot more to uncover there as well. Just cognizant of time, I want to make sure we're moving through. He to we, what did we find out?
So, He to We doesn't actually have a website, so we got to read an amazing email. It's basically their mission focuses around like changing political language to be gender neutral, especially like the Minnesota Constitution. It's like the governor, he lives here, he does this, and blah, 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 blah. And they technically have not launched yet. So they're going to launch in 2021, which at first we were like, oh yeah. And then we realized it is 2021. So we had some questions about when they're actually trying to launch. And they're a really cool company. They want some help with like marketing. They don't really have their plan yet, but they have like a lot of their partnerships and their work in place. Like when they do roll out, they're going to go on the senator's Instagram, which has like over 1 million followers. So that's why they're trying to really cement their marketing now before they launch.
For those of you that are interested in kind of the marketing space or project management for like social media, this is a very intriguing project that has gotten a lot of attention for both University of Minnesota and our state collectively, like you said. First and foremost, there's no website. And so what does that marketing plan look like? Those of you working on this project, I think, are going to do a lot to shape that. Thank you. And We Sparkle?
We had WeSparkle on pretty much what WeSparkle is an AI powered customer service in a way through texting. So just going through their website, that had a lot of information about like how it works, the clients, everything like that. The biggest questions we had is the extent of some of the features. So the big features are like you can schedule meetings and appointments and Zoom sessions and all that fun stuff, but they also have an upselling aspect to it. And we're really kind of interested and unsure about what upselling your products really means to text. So we're confused about that. And then just the extent of some of their pricing levels was a little unclear. We had to do a lot of digging to kind of even find out what the different price levels were. So yeah, that's what we're kind of confused about and would like more info on.
I love it. These are getting into some great questions. And so with all of these organizations and projects, I think it's important, the more you can do your own due diligence on the organization overall, will then allow you to spend the majority of your time focusing on what is their issue and how would you be valuable helping contribute to solve their issues. And so thank you for WeSparkle. What about ISCI?
Yeah, ISCI is a healthcare. Their mission and vision is to champion healthcare quality and get better health outcomes in the community for Minnesota. It seems like a large focus of what they do is on education. And it seems like a lot of what they're doing is trying to educate healthcare providers on both the opiate epidemic and also mental health care. And a lot of what they're doing is especially revolving around the opiate epidemic is they're trying to educate healthcare providers on safer prescription methods as well as alternative pain regulation to try to cut down on the amount of opiates that are in the community. They also run disposal programs to try to get excess pills out of the community. And they're also doing a lot with the mental health challenges that are surrounding COVID-19 for both the community and for healthcare providers who are all dealing with a lot of stress and isolation at this time. But I guess my kind of question was is whether or not whether educating the healthcare providers or educating the community would be a more effective way to go about this, sort of whether especially with the opiate epidemic, like I understand that getting the doctors to prescribe less is definitely uh, um, a big part of it, but also just the community as well.
And ICSI is also a health partner sponsored initiative. It brings together a broad spectrum of providers who collaborate on the development of clinical practice guidelines. And for any, like my question is, for any initiative, I'm sorry, 1 second here. Yeah, so for any organization or any like a forum like this that's trying to set up guidelines for the whole industry, I'm a little skeptical about that because there might be a risk of monopoly in that, just like after a quick glance at it. Even though it has a lot of members from other healthcare groups, I still have that initial question, and that needs to. I don't know, like who's their supervisor, like who's looking at the guidelines they build together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you have an organization like that, it's important where there's a lot of constituents, a lot of collaboration and partnership, is understanding, those checks and balances. So those of you that are interested in systems change and healthcare, I think that's appealing or intriguing topic, as Matthew said as well. It creates a very vague impact or mission vision statement. Finally, I want to make sure we're closing out with Paulin as well.
Yeah, so I can talk for our group. So in terms of, we looked a lot at their website, especially their like mission, vision, and about page, and just learning that they're like consider themselves like an online magazine that seeks to like bridge the gap between like communities, especially, and they do this through like posting opportunities and stories. And something else we noticed like about their organization itself is that they seem to really value like that internal like transparency. They even like posted on their like employment page about how they have about their like pay structure and like how they're like compensating their contributors. So that was something that we'd like to know more about as well. Because I think there's like one thing between like saying you compensate in a way, and I think it's like it'd be interesting to know how they do it like business wise. Otherwise, things we wanted to know is learning more about who they consider to be their target market, I guess, because their website seems really specific and like artistic and specialized, and with the idea of like bridging communities, just like wondering like what communities specifically they're hoping to bridge, and like considering like how accessible like looking at like a website like this can be. And otherwise, they also have like a Pollen studio who they people hire them to create things for them. So just wondering how that business structure fits in with them being a nonprofit would be interesting to learn more about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of questions. Thank you for sharing. So it sounds like we found out at a high level what each of these organizations are doing. We're going to come in Thursday. I would encourage you each to have, a question or two of a fact of what you want to find out about the organization. And then after class Thursday, as I talked about, be making sure to update on Canvas which of those organizations you would like to be working with. Question of the day that I would leave you thinking about, and something that you can whether do research on websites, social media, news outlets, but is understanding what have the organizations been doing specifically based on the past year that we've had related to COVID, related to the murder of George Floyd and social justice issues, related to economic uncertainty, and how are they moving forward, making sure to incorporate that into their organizations. The last thing I do also want to talk about is in terms of just the Canvas structure is you'll see those assignments. If you click on each one, you'll see the assignment due dates. I make sure to post everything on that syllabus page. And so that tends to be a living dynamic document that after this class, I'll make sure tomorrow to be putting up the recording of this class. So you have that as well as the question of the day and homework that we discussed. I do need to make sure to update those modules, but please do not feel that those modules, are not current. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. But otherwise, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you each on Thursday.
Thank you.
See you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi.